My guest today is Mike Kanovitz, founder of Jurat, a startup with an ambitious goal of bringing legal rights to Web3 by connecting courts to the blockchain. Mike is a founding partner at Lovey & Lovey, one of the most prominent civil rights litigation firms in the United States. After practicing civil rights for 20 plus years, he had his first crypto consumer protection case, which soon led to the discovery that the world of Web3 aligned with the values he was already seeking to enforce in his current career. Now, he is building a solution to make it all possible. LFG, baby. Let's start vibing.
Zach French is a bar-certified attorney, and nothing expressed by Zach during Web3 with me shall be considered legal advice. All the opinions expressed by Zach and his guests are solely their own opinions. All content in Web3 with me is for informational purposes only. Zach and his podcast guests may maintain positions in the securities discussed during Web3 with me.
Well, welcome to the show, Mike.
Thanks, Zach. Good to be here.
I've been excited about this, not only because a mutual friend works for you over at Jurat, but because I feel like Jurat is solving a problem with the Web3 perception issue, which is on the security side, right? So I'm excited to get into it with you and learn a lot about that. But first, I always like to let my audience get to know my guests. This can be Web3, but I really want to know like who you are, like what makes Mike Mike. So feel free to start wherever you'd like.
Well, I guess I'll start by disclosing the fact I'm an attorney because people have opinions about that both ways. And I practice civil rights litigation. That's my background. And of course, I got into it because I want to spend my time working on issues that feel like they have meaning to me and maybe do things that if I wasn't doing them wouldn't happen. So the way I feel about a lot of corporate jobs, and I did work at a corporate law firm for a little while, is if I got up from my desk and went on and did somebody else, somebody would sit down there and it would keep going exactly the way it is. So I've sought out cases and issues where, I felt like I could put my whole self into it and hopefully make a difference. And believe it or not, that drew me to Web3 because during COVID, when they shut the courts down, you couldn't go really around suing people very much. So, and we have a large law firm, particularly for doing civil rights. We had 100 people in the firm. So we all decided to work on projects that were interesting to us. And I decided to do crypto consumer protection. And then that led me down the rabbit hole. And it's been a fascinating journey since.
Yeah, I love that. So you have this innate personality where you want to make a difference. You don't want to be a cog in the wheel, right? And you want to have an impact on society writ large. And then in turn, when you started to get deeper and deeper into your practice and, outside factors made you kind of look into the crypto space, right? Now you find yourself building a product around it. So take me through kind of the founding story of Jurat from, idea to, kind of where we are now. And then we'll kind of go through exactly how it works and that kind of stuff.
Sure. So it did grow out of the consumer protection practice at my law firm. And we put up a cheapy website and we're just pretty amazed by how many people wrote us saying, help me. I fell for a phishing scam. Someone in Asia told me that they loved me, like all of the ways that people get screwed over. And for most of them, we couldn't really do anything because, they don't really know the person that did this to them. Their actual identity. They know an address on a blockchain, but that's just a string of numbers and letters. And so, there's all these consumer protection laws out there, but there's really nothing a court could do. So I started thinking around that issue and, trying to look for someone who might be responsible to help these people. The miners seemed like an obvious place to go because they are the operators of the blockchain, and even though it's not a formal corporation, it's sort of like a partnership. It's sort of like an unincorporated association where they're all working through the agreement that their software forms to operate this network, but no one of them could do anything. Even if you went and got a court order and served it on them, it wouldn't make any difference. Whereas if somebody had stolen money out of your bank account, you know where to take that court order and the bank would comply. So what we started doing is we got together with some blockchain engineers and talked about the problem from the legal and procedural side of it with the court, and the problem with maintaining decentralization, from the blockchain side of it, and basically came up with some layer one protocols to allow the nodes themselves to go out to court dockets, look at what the courts are saying, and be able to implement it autonomously without introducing an intermediary. So there's no one, telling the blockchain, oh, the court said this or the court said that, because that's up to interpretation. Many lawyers have jobs doing nothing other than telling their clients what the court said. So we had to, streamline that process in order to be true to decentralization.
I love that. I think one of the things that I picked out of reading your white paper was the fact that you have a focus on not sacrificing some of the core tenets and promises of blockchain in doing what you're doing. Do you want to expand a little bit about how you're going about that in a truly Web3 native and blockchain native way?
Yeah. So yeah, the first priority is we can't sacrifice what's good about blockchain and decentralization, because then we haven't done anybody a service. We have to take what exists, preserve it, and improve it, and hopefully help the blockchain world find that common ground with the law enforcement and the regulators and everything that takes place in real life, so that blockchain and Web3 can really achieve the vision of becoming this backbone of our internet and the mainstream commerce and all of that.
One of the things that was recurrent in your white paper was the fact that you are maintaining all of these core tenets of the blockchain in building this out, and how important that was to I guess, get buy-in from the people that are already interacting with Web3. Yeah. And I was just wondering, like, what other things other than decentralization are you focused on to make sure that we kind of preserve the aspects of the blockchain, the reason that people actually interact with it?
Right. So first is we wanted to preserve the transaction verification process as it exists now. So right now, if I send a message to the blockchain telling it I want it to do X, Y, or Z, I sign it with my private key. And as that message gets passed amongst the nodes, they'll confirm, yes, this was signed with the private key. And that's what makes the network resilient and impervious to attack. So we wanted to make sure that that process was preserved when we were bringing in, essentially this outside legal authority and bringing it on chain. So we built the protocol such that each node still goes through a confirmation process. It's just that instead of checking that it's signed by the private key, it checks that the transaction has been authorized by a valid court. And it does that by going out and checking the public docket like any human being could. But now each node goes and looks and says, oh yeah, that court order really does say I'm supposed to approve this transaction, and therefore I will.
I love that. So I guess, what does it take on your end to get courts to participate in this part of the process? I imagine that is one of the big hurdles for you, is to get buy-in from them to acknowledge blockchain-based IDs and issue orders based upon that.
Yeah. So that was another, in addition to preserving decentralization on the blockchain side, another of the design philosophies was we can't be telling judges what to do. We can't tell them how to do their
as much as we'd like to sometimes.
And can you imagine sitting down and actually having to try to educate them what a wallet is and what a private key is? Yeah.
Yeah. So, I can't do that with my friends that hang out with me every day. So let's.
I know. I'm a lot older than you are, but most judges are even older than me. So good luck with that. So what we did is, we came up with this system that sort of puts it on the litigants to generate their own transaction ID and provide it to the judge. And the judge just does what the judge normally does. They hear the evidence, they write an opinion, they put it on the docket. And if they side with the plaintiff, then they'll use the ID that the plaintiff tendered. If they side with the defendant, they'll use the ID that the defendant tendered, and they'll just paste it into their opinion. The same as if, for example, you were litigating over a bank account, the judge would have to paste the bank account number into their opinion, because that's what it concerns. And so we tried to make it completely seamless. As far as judges' willingness to do this, so far they've had no problem with it. They've kind of been amused, by
Yeah.
it. They're like, great, I don't really have to learn what this is, and it still works. So.
Yeah, that's nice. And I guess from an anonymity perspective, how are you maintaining the anonymity side of the blockchain through Jurat?
So if somebody wants to come into court and litigate, they by and large can't do that anonymously. There's some court procedures. If you can come in and say, this is a matter of my personal safety or something like that, they'll let you proceed as a John Doe. But other than that, courts are public proceedings and everybody has a right to know what's happening. So at least from the plaintiff side of it, that's just not how the process works. From the defendant side of it, we have set up the legal engineering around this so that a plaintiff could sue an account address as opposed to suing the individual, and then still provide due process notice to the address so that at least at that stage of it, anonymity would be preserved. If the defendant comes in and litigates it again, they'd have to ask the judge for permission to proceed as a John Doe.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting because, like, I guess, I mean, it kind of hits on one of the core use cases that I explore a lot through the show, which is like, what is identity,
Yeah.
right? I think up to this point, a typical person would say, well, it's your name, it's your date of birth, it's your address, it's the things that you've liked on Facebook, but like more importantly, what blockchain has done and what Web3 has done is they've provided an identity layer of what you actually do, right? It's a transactional, and what you own is a much better reflection of who you are than the zip code that you live in or the city that you live in, right? That's not to take away that I don't have pride about Atlanta because I live here and I think it's a great city, but Zach is more of the art that he purchases through NFTs than he is the city he lives in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a super granular way of getting to know somebody. It's an important point. The ability, I guess, the blockchain certainly ties everything back to an address and the ownership, and it makes it very public. Query if that's better or worse than when Facebook and Google are the only ones that know those things about you. So
it's all about balance. My guest this past week was Justin Daniels. He specializes in cybersecurity. He's an attorney over at Baker Donaldson, and the episode is literally called "Finding Balance," and it's because there's one side that says, I don't want you to have all my information, right? But then the other side of the person is like, but wait, you got to keep me safe, right? And so you have competing interests there. And then once you're keeping someone safe, how far is too far? When do you become a surveillance state, right? So there's you got to find all these different kind of intricacies and try to find a balance where it's fair and equitable for everybody.
For sure. I've been encountering that issue. And I also do a privacy law practice around biometrics. So fingerprints, facial identification, and we file class actions from time to time having to do with businesses that are collecting this information, not disclosing that they're collecting this information, and maybe not handling it in a safe way. And of course, similar to the things that you own and the permanent record of those transactions, you're never going to change your biometrics. And so if they get out there and can get abused in a certain way, I mean, who knows where it all leads? We're just barely beginning to scratch the surface of how it's all going to come together and what it's going to get used for 10 years from now even. So the issue of control and safety, and I'd like the convenience of just being able to walk up to my front door, and if it recognizes me, lets me in. But by the same token, if that's a Nest or whatever those doorbells are, those get hacked and people take that information. So
yeah. Yeah, I think about that all the time when I have nanny cams at my house,
Yep.
right? Like, where did I buy these nanny cams from?
Yeah.
What's the deal with this company? Are they keeping all of the video? I don't know. I mean, I looked into it before I did it, but
Yeah.
at the time, those are the types of things you have to think about.
And whose servers are they running it through? And it just becomes mind boggling.
Yeah, it is. It is. One of my favorite quotes from your white paper, and I'm going to read it, that like really struck a chord with me. It kind of hits on what you were talking about earlier. You say the mass of commerce, however, is predicated on the enforceability of laws, often complex. If blockchain is to attract mainstream commerce and becomes its backbone, which is a core goal of Web3, it must provide the certainty of effective enforcement that commerce already enjoys and demands. I I say that in so many different words on every single show, right? Like seriously, like it people have to take a practical approach to this and realize one, not everybody wants the autonomy, and two, not everybody wants to be on the blockchain until they feel safe,
For sure.
right? There's no mainstream adoption. So with that, I think let's go through a thought experiment. Let's say Jurat really catches on. You've got buy-in from all the relevant jurisdictions and the courts, and it is successful by all measures. It's a two-part question. One, what does it take for you to get there? What are the parties that you need to partner with and do business with in order to get there? And then two, what is Jurat doing once you have that adoption and network effects that you need for it to be effective?
Yeah. So the first part of the question. So who do I need to bring into the fold? I think that what obviously we need to be able to get courts comfortable with this, but so far so good. Uh, as you know, a court only gets involved when there's an actual case or controversy. So there's somewhat of a chicken and the egg problem, so I need people to be using Jurat and then suffer from a crime so that they then have a controversy to bring to the court. Now, that's not completely a problem because people can use it for settlements. We just had a lawsuit this week where we had the blockchain itself bring an action against individuals that have been sanctioned by the US government so that they're not allowed to transact their blockchain accounts. So we actually sued them to get an injunction to freeze their private key. So that's an immediate case or controversy. So it's out there and it'll be happening. But there is that ramp up between getting adoption and then getting use is the first thing. And that's for the idea of using this at the layer one so that the whole blockchain can be compliant. There is also this idea where you can just use it more like an oracle in a smart contract. And I think that will get much more rapid adoption because that's a utility for a smart contract that doesn't exist right now. And I do talk about that in the white paper, the problem of, taking advantage of what smart contracts have to offer, which is this automated execution of rules so that everybody can rely on it, is great for a very simplified use case. Like, I want this digital asset to transfer if the reported price on the blockchain reaches X.
Mm-hmm.
But, what about where I want to pay this manufacturer in China for these bicycles that got shipped to my store so long as they meet the specifications? That doesn't work very well. And so you need to have circuit breakers in there where courts can become involved. That's one side of it. And then the other side of it is you can't code every contingency that can happen into a smart contract.
Haven't been able to write that
No,
as of yet.
because you can't predict the future. You don't really. I mean, you try to account for what you can. And the analogy I think I used in the white paper is that there's 1,000-page contracts that lawyers get paid millions of dollars to draft, and guess what? Those end up in litigation. So there has to be this ability because you can't be omniscient. You can't even know for sure what someone meant by the words and without the context. And so there has to be some way to resort to court. So I think for smart contracts to really take off, there needs to be a solution like the one we're offering, whether it's us or not, who knows. But so I see those as prime adoptions. And then getting across to regulators and law enforcement how this technology gives them ways to do their job that expand their abilities to regulate in a fair way. So, for example, right now, there's not a whole lot that regulators can do about decentralized protocols. It could be a blockchain, it could be a DeFi contract, whatever, unless it's in fact centralized so that they can deal with the people who have remained control. And I don't want that, and most customers, particularly after FTX, don't want it. Um, or they have to find a way to get at people in real life, and basically they have to rely on KYC. KYC practiced through the banking system. So you see crypto regulation really taking place through Treasury, and the SEC can make their rules and bring enforcement actions again against centralized people, but it's Treasury that sanctioned Blender.io, and sanctioned the software. So, so having the ability to go to court, do an enforcement action like you are familiar with, involving a smart contract, gives the regulators a much more, elegant way of fine tuning their regulations, because now they have a way to enforce it that is very specific to what's happening on chain, as opposed to, I'm going to take KYC, I'm going to put it on steroids. That's going to have an impact on your privacy. No one's going to be allowed to transact with each other unless they go through these centralized VASPs. I don't think that the blockchain world really wants to see it evolve in that direction. But they're also like holding on really tight to this idea that the government shouldn't have any say so over what happens on chain. And really, if you accept the idea that blockchains are human institutions that operate in countries where the users sit, and where they own property like a house and a car, and the government doesn't come and just seize it from them for no good reason. And if you come to accept that courts really do protect individuals, like that's what they're there to do. They're the organ between government power and the citizens. And so that's the proper place to put these decisions. And if blockchain gets its arms around that, then I think industry will start to want to include these sorts of capabilities, because they're doing themselves a favor.
I love that. I do want to unpack a few things there. Number one, the suit that you recently filed was a pretty big deal. Do you mind just kind of walking the audience through exactly what it was, and why you did it?
Sure. So the first blockchain that we've created with the Jurat technology in it is a Bitcoin fork, and we forked it as of block height 7.7808, but it was effective January 8th, 2022. So any Bitcoin accounts that existed as of that moment also exist on our Jurat BTC blockchain. Some of those accounts were sanctioned by the president of the United States, because they belonged to North Korean hackers that were engaging in ransomware against major U.S. corporations, or Russians that interfered in the U.S. elections, or people who are guilty of really heinous human rights violations. There's a bunch of different executive orders that give those powers. And so no U.S. person is supposed to allow a transaction to take place involving the blockchain accounts that the government listed that belong to these individuals. Now, if you go look on the Bitcoin blockchain, those accounts got emptied out because the government passed the sanctions, and the criminals just laughed and used their private keys and moved the coins. So essentially, the miners on the Bitcoin blockchain ended up processing transactions that the federal government says are illegal and that you're not allowed to do. Now, they don't really have much of a choice, because that's how their protocol works. Query whether that needs to be addressed. But in our fork of Bitcoin, we put in Jurat, so that even though no one can hit a button and say, I'm blocking this account, we can go to a court and we can say, here is proof that these accounts have been sanctioned by the US government, and therefore their private keys should be held to be invalid to spend these coins. Enter an order. And so what we got This week is what's called, for your audience, a temporary restraining order. It's something you can do at the very earliest beginnings of a case to preserve the status quo. So what the judge did is the judge entered an order that said the coins are frozen for 14 days, and now you can go serve the lawsuit on the defendants. And then the defendants can come in, and if I'm wrong, they'll tell me I'm wrong, and I can unfreeze these coins. So as of this moment, the Jurat BTC blockchain has actually complied with sanctions by the Office of Foreign Asset Control of the United States Department of Treasury, and that's historic because no blockchain has done that before. And it's good for our community. It's really good for our miners because they don't have to worry that they're somehow violating the law. And I think it's going to be good for Treasury once they see that, that this technology exists for their regulatory purposes. But at any rate, we just today started serving the defendants, and we got the judge to allow electronic service, so we don't have to go to North Korea and tag them with the papers and tell them they're served. And so we sent NFTs to some Ethereum addresses that they own. We want to send dust transaction messages to them on Bitcoin, but technically that would be violating the sanctions because has a little bit of value to it. So I applied for a special license with Treasury to have the right to send those transactions. I assume it'll get granted, but we're waiting on
for
that.
purposes of service. Got it. Yeah. That would be kind of ironic, right? I love that. I mean, we keep coming back to a central point here, which is one, regardless of the blockchain's anonymous, decentralized, self-custody nature, you still have to be able to enforce laws around it, right? And two, Jurat is maintaining that the people, the miners, the individuals involved transacting on the blockchain are not losing what they value most in interacting with Jurat, right? To get these legal protections, which is just great. I want to move to the next point, which was one of my questions as I was reading the white paper was, when you're determining intent of a contract, right, there may be some off-chain data that you need. And you kind of alluded to the fact that oracles might play a role in some of this. Have you thought about how oracles might interact with the Jurat blockchain to help bring some of that off-chain data, like the specifications around a bike being consistent with what was issued or not consistent, back onto the blockchain so that it could be enforceable?
So the answer is not that much, because I see that more as something that smart contract developers are going to create as they know that they have the ability to take the dispute to a neutral referee who actually has legal authority to act. But I mean, Jurat itself is essentially an oracle that's built in, at the layer one level, because each node is going and looking off chain for itself to see what the court has ruled. Now, those same nodes can go perform that function and then provide that data to a different blockchain in the form of an Oracle service. And that is something that we've done for Ethereum and will continue to do. Like we created an Ethereum wrapper contract for a court in 2021 to transfer USDC. So we can provide Oracle information about the exact state change that a court says should happen. So there's no ambiguity. But in terms of the things that the court would want to know, there's a lot of value in other Oracle services that can bring that onto the blockchain so that, you get all of the good stuff about blockchain. It's undisputed, it's reliable, it's not going to change. We know exactly, provenance, we know exactly where it came from. Those things can really help with the evidentiary procedures a court is going to use. And they can help with the evidentiary procedures a court uses, even if the dispute's not about a blockchain transaction. So I think we'll get there. Courts tend to move slow.
No, never. I filed something yesterday and it's already ready to go tomorrow, you know?
Actually, they were waiting for me when I showed up. They were.
That's great. That's great. So the logical extension of that question is a lot of this is about enforcing rights around digital assets. One of the areas that is being explored and I think is necessary to understand and really proliferate Web3 and blockchain is the tying of physical assets on chain. Where is Jurat in kind of that relationship? Is that an expansion plan or anything like that to
So yes,
help enforce
so
physical
that's a
rights?
real issue.
Yeah.
So for digital assets, we can already put a Jurat functionality into it. So, for example, we're about to release a new wallet update for the Jurat BTC, and you'll be able to mint ordinals. And when you mint them, you'll be able to choose the exact license or upload your own bespoke license, but it'll be on chain and part of it, so there's no dispute. And you'll be able to select a royalty. And if that royalty doesn't get paid, then you can enforce it against the ordinal. You can go to court. You can freeze that ordinal. They'll either pay the royalty. If not, you'll take it back. So that works great for a digitally native asset. And if you're going to create a digital asset that reflects, for example, your house, so
Yeah.
the deed to your house, it's got to be able to have the same judicial functionality on chain as your house does off chain. So, you know, you're a lawyer, if you get a mortgage, somebody's got a lien. And a lot of times that lien gets, that mortgage gets sold 100 different times.
Mm-hmm.
So that NFT that represents your deed, which is now encumbered by another NFT that represents the mortgage, have to be able to talk to each other, including ownership. And then what happens when you default on it? And unfortunately, hopefully your house doesn't get sold, but the fees go up or whatever the case may be. That's got to be able to be reflected on chain. And the mortgage company isn't the only entity that might end up with an interest in your house. What happens if you get divorced? What happens if there's a mechanic's lien that gets filed against your house, or someone gets a judgment against you and tries to satisfy it against your house? There's no way right now for those legal obligations that are important in the real world and which actually make home ownership and home finance possible. Or a tax lien, for example, you got to pay taxes on your house. There's no route to get those on chain in a way that doesn't involve a trusted intermediary who is going to be fallible and a central point of failure and all of that, other than to go to court and have it declared. And so having Jurat functionality either at layer one of the blockchains that are handling those digitized real world assets, or as part of the minting contract that creates them, allows a decentralized method and a legally binding referee, for lack of a better word, to say, yeah, this is now part of the legal obligations of that digital asset, and this is the method by which that happens. So I think right now we're just playing around with ordinals, but it'll translate.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, having done a bit of research on the real estate side, my wife's a real estate agent. Going to a Proppy conference. I mean, basically, what they're doing is just taking everything that's done off chain and doing it on chain right now. It isn't that it's necessarily any more enforceable. They still have to do all of the off chain legal requirements in order to purchase a house, transfer a house, what have you. So at some point, like it requires adoption, right? I mean, just like, you're seeing with Jurat, like you need the courts and the municipal system to recognize that. And when they do, they're going to realize that it's a much more efficient system of record.
Oh yeah, for sure. Of course, on an individual basis, the person that gets elected to county clerk or the recorder of deeds probably doesn't want to have to learn about it. So, the Proppies of the world will make it go smooth, and at some point they'll get the buy-in, but that's going to be down the road because all the people who deal with the property office aren't going to want to learn it off the bat either. So, it'll, I suppose there'll be a period of time where you have like essentially what you say Proppy's doing, where it's in parallel. You have to
Yeah.
be filing it in paper, but you can also maintain it on the blockchain. And then over time, as people get comfortable, or you have that case where the NFT gets stolen, and now you can have a legal battle about it, and the court can say, yeah, that is legally binding. And furthermore, I'm instructing the recorder of deeds to change the paper records to match what the NFT now says.
I
So
love that. I
who
love
knows how
that.
it's going to happen? But the more it gets used, I mean, we all know things are going to end up in court and get settled.
Exactly. Just the provenance issue alone, I think it just provides so much value to what we would consider traditional governmental systems of record. A lot of it being paper printed out in a file cabinet, maybe misplaced. I've had a relative whose divorce settlement, they crossed out her name by accident. And so she wasn't technically divorced because she did not sign it. So there's things like that that
That's a
like,
nightmare.
right? And apparently it wasn't the first time in this jurisdiction. So it is a pain. I do want to take it to the second part of my question, and thanks for explaining that. The second part of the thought experiment was let's fast forward 5 years. I mean, you're seeing adoption now. You're filing successfully lawsuits around enforcement on the blockchain. What is Jurat in 5 years, assuming all goes well? What are you doing?
I think we're doing a couple things. One is we are operating our own legally and regulatory compliant forks of popular blockchains. Those will be usable in their own right. Uh, Additionally, the infrastructure that we create to support those blockchains will be made available to other blockchains that want to be able to import this capability. And so we actually have a plan, hopefully by Q4, to release a Polygon fork that will, at a very low level, allow courts to interact with smart contracts, make contract calls, and essentially take what we've done with the Bitcoin fork, which is relatively simplistic. It's freeze, it's transfer. That's what happens on Bitcoin, and apply that to a vibrant smart contracting environment. But the nodes that are operating that infrastructure can supply that same information to other chains. And I think that other chains will eventually want to incorporate that. And I don't know exactly how that's going to happen. Is it going to be incorporated on a main chain? Is someone going to create a side chain? But there's real utility there, and so it will start to get adopted that way. And then secondly, is we will be a studio that's helping to incorporate this technology in other people's products, because the blockchain engineering is substantial, but really so is the legal engineering. Like, for example, to make the Bitcoin fork work, we had to understand what sort of entity is this, and uh, in order to make sure that courts had jurisdiction over the ledger, which is everywhere and nowhere, we had to have
Right.
agreement on where the ledger is. You know. So we're deeply into it. We put a lot of thought into these issues. We're like out in front, and there's Bitcoin SV is trying to do some of this too, but we're here to guide people. So I think that'll be an aspect of it. And then I do think that because regulators and law enforcement are going to be wanting these capabilities and are going to need guidance about, how do you even go about doing it? Where do we get a wallet? Uh, uh, what do I say to a court? I think law enforcement, regulators, and courts, there'll be an educational aspect of this. By the time you became a lawyer, Westlaw was being thoroughly taught in schools.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I wasn't looking through books that
yeah.
often.
But like when I started off, they would come around to the law firms and they'd bring you lunch and they'd try to teach you how to use their product. So I feel like we're going to have to do some of that with judges, and so I'm actually looking forward to it.
So there's just an educational aspect. There is a sales aspect, and then there's a strategy aspect, right? Of what is the right way to go about this? Do we want to target, in terms of partnerships, courts first, then exchanges, and then whoever else you'd need to kind of adopt it in order for it to work. And if you get there, then you've created the legal security safety backstop that we're missing right now, frankly.
That's what we're hoping to do. And then maybe I can turn around and represent all those people that contacted us during COVID and help them get their coins back.
There you go. I mean, I've got somebody sitting there with some of my money right now for sending me a DM at just the right amount of, just the right time of night. It is a rite of passage in this space, but it'd be nice if I still had it, right?
Can you still see it on the blockchain?
Oh yeah, definitely.
What kind of coin?
It was I paid 0.2 ETH for a fake mint.
Oh man, so they've got your ETH and
yeah. So it was great. I mean, honestly, hats off to them. I guess if I have to be an optimist here, they had sent me a direct message on Discord at the exact time I joined the Adidas Discord. It was right after the Adidas Prada drop. And I was like, okay, but it had the same icon. So I just thought I was in the Adidas Discord. It was like, mint, this thing, here's all the classic like scammy things, but it was right there. So I was 11 o'clock at night, clicked on it, went through, and then I was like, wait a second. And the website was beautiful, Mike. I mean, I'm telling you, it looked just like Adidas's website. If you clicked on products, it linked to a real Adidas website. It had pictures of Bored Apes everywhere. They had already done that, collaboration with Bored Apes. And at the end of the day, I was like, wait a second, that's a direct message. Luckily, I had my cold wallet set up, and I just started transferring assets at like 11:30 at night, just getting them out of there. And I still have the hot wallet. I don't use it very often, but they only took the money you minted. They had at the time like 500 ETH from doing this, but they didn't the transaction that I signed did not allow them to take any other assets. They just wanted the mint, right? So yeah, I mean, there's stuff like that someone like me is just like, it's part of learning, right? But it doesn't have to be. And a lot of people won't participate because that's part of the learning.
Oh, for sure. Well, first of all, I respect that you respect the artistry of what they accomplished with that. And I think it's also, kind of cool that they didn't become greedy. They tried to keep it small so that they could keep it going for a long time.
Yeah. And unless you minted multiple at the time, I mean, what did you pay? I think Bitcoin or ETH was probably at, like 2,500 at the time. So, it's, $500, right? I'm not saying that's not a small, it's definitely not that much in the grand scheme of things. I can survive luckily without it.
Totally. And, same here. Obviously we all know that there's a lot of people out there who are, coming to crypto because they can't even get a bank account, and a small amount of money can be their life savings. And, another part of what drove us to really look at this issue and try to come up with solutions is, getting those emails. And it really is heartbreaking. And, I'm well off. I'm sitting here in the United States. If my crypto got stolen, I still have my Visa card, I still have my bank account, I still have my paycheck. But having people from all over the world try to get this across really, drove it home.
Yeah, it brings up a really, really good point. One of my previous guests, Ian Andrews, he's the CMO over at Chainalysis, and he really drove home a point for me, which is it's not always about the unbanked. There are a lot of unbanked, but you and I, we don't know what that's like, right? Like, fortunately, we don't, but like there's a lot of people that affects. But on the other side of things, if you're transacting in a country like Nigeria, where you have to set up a manufacturing company, and that manufacturing company wants to trade in the global reserve currency, which is US dollars. But in a country like Nigeria, it may take you 30 days to convert your Nigerian money into a US dollar. And by that point, the prices may have changed for the inputs that you need to manufacture it.
Yeah.
Well, if you have USDC, that problem is solved,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So there is a lot of really cool use cases for people in countries that don't have the benefits that we have, and enforceability. If Jurat has anything to say about it,
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. No, that's an interesting point. Is we're providing highly liquid access to dollars all over the world, which, doubles back to the idea that blockchain is in our national interest, not just for that reason, but for a lot of other reasons. Being able to avoid censorship in countries that are less free than ours. These are all, American ideals that we like to see spread around the world. And so blockchain has a case to make, law enforcement has a case to make, and we're hoping that we're able to get the best of both worlds combined and, help blockchain move forward.
yeah, and it's essential that we can enforce our legal rights when we do that, right? It's not. I mean, from the first episode of my show in May of 2022, one of the common discussions is a lot of the bull cases for crypto is dystopia in the rest of the world,
Totally.
right? And if there exists a balance where you can still have legal rights and not complete societal breakdown, I'd choose that one.
Totally.
I think.
The dystopian point is a great point because, I'm a big sci-fi guy. And one of the things that was upsetting to me was this idea that if courts really can't do anything about this, then courts cease to be particularly relevant if blockchain is ascendant, because they can't do anything, and so I practice civil rights law. I do trials. I see justice happen, and I know that it's really important. And I also, because I've been practicing law for a while and we all went to law school, we have an understanding that none of the way that human beings are able to interact, the complex ways that support the way we live today, are possible without complex laws that require enforcement mechanisms that everybody can rely on at the end of the day. I mean, people like to hate on courts and the law and lawsuits, but it's like oxygen to the commerce system. So so that dystopian thought really drove me to try to figure out how are we going to make it so that these two systems can coexist and maybe even make things better on both sides of the equation.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's providing that level of security not only puts the kind of sentiment of new consumers or customers or communities, however you want to phrase it, but it also just provides that level of balance where, and you talk about this a lot in your white paper, where there's risk priced into all these assets and they're still at extraordinary prices.
Yeah.
Imagine what happens when that risk is decreased, right? I mean, that in itself is the ultimate scale, risk reward, right?
I mean, the whole idea of property rights are things that you can rely on. And so the more reliable it is, the more valuable it is. And I think of the analogy of, if you took my house and put it in a neighborhood that was poorly policed, where, houses get broken into all the time and, you're not safe in your own home, that house is worth an awful lot less, even though it's the exact same piece of property down to the, last detail, as it is in the neighborhood I'm fortunate to live in. So having, effective law enforcement makes property much more valuable.
It makes property much more valuable. And then taking your analogy a step further, it also can decrease disparity in pricing, right? If you live I live in a gentrified area for all intensive purposes. And the people that go to the corner store in the area a couple blocks from here where there is a ton of crime and there's a ton of drugs, they're actually paying more for their goods and they can afford less because there is so much shoplifting and so much theft that the owners of these shops have to price it in order to make money.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah, that's true. And also there's less competition in those neighborhoods for corner stores because a lot of people are like, I'm not getting involved.
I'm not.
Yeah. So like imagine how FTX looks if, Citibank and Chase and all of them felt comfortable taking digital assets. Yeah. FTX does not happen.
No, it does not. It does not. And I'm sure that that has crossed a lot of people's minds lately, having thought about that. Well, we're nearing the top of the hour. I do have one really burning question that I want to ask you, and then I have two traditional closing questions that I close each show with. Um, what is Jurat's business model? How does Jurat actually make money?
So, like a lot of startups, our original phase is we want to change the world. Let's figure out how to do it. We'll worry about how to make money later. We're now moving into the money making phase. And so one is by creating our own bespoke blockchains, we will have token economics associated with it. So, for example, the Bitcoin fork that we created has its own coin, which is JTC. It's not publicly. Oh yeah, actually, that's right. You're an early adopter.
I'm an early
Yeah, yeah.
adopter.
So that's going to be listed soon, and we also are going to have. We're about to come out with an app called Zabbo that'll be a peer-to-peer way of trading it and therefore monetizing JTC. And we've been encouraging people to actually spend it as thank you as digital currency. So that we didn't pre-mine any of it because we're true to Bitcoin, but we are participating as miners, and therefore we'll just make money like other miners will. Licensing the technology to other blockchains that want to use it is another business model, and then because we have this court connection capability, and Zabbo is an example of this, we have the ability to create commercially viable smart contracts where you have the ability to resort to court and therefore offer these products that are much more usable by mainstream commerce. So Zabbo, for example, two sides. We use the example of a freelancer who wants to do business over the internet,
Like a
which they
Fiverr
don't know.
type, right?
Yeah, they can specify their contract. They can require the customer to escrow the money in that contract before they begin, so they don't have to worry about getting ripped off. Meanwhile, the customer doesn't have to worry about getting a shoddy product, because if they didn't get what they were supposed to get, there's a dispute resolution mechanism built in. And for Zabbo, we've got an arbitration mechanism built in by an arbitration company that we've started that's Web3 specialized called Arbit3.
Oh, nice.
And that'll deal with small disputes that people really can't take to court. But for larger disputes that people do want to take to court, they've got Jurat built into it. And so they will be able to use smart contracts in a way that feels an awful lot like a paper contract.
I love that. So you've got some vertical and horizontal integration going on, where you're moving upstream, realizing that there are certain disputes that are best handled by courts, and there are certain disputes that the courts need not interfere with. A lot of people have arbitration clauses in their contracts, and if it makes sense for the whatever the transaction is, then you can make that work with Arbit3. That's very cool.
Yeah.
Get
it launched.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. Excited for everything you're doing. I do have my two traditional closing questions that I ask every guest. The first one is, how do you describe Web3?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. I'll tell you how I've heard it described, and it's from all over the place. Some people call it like the Internet of Value, which I find not very satisfying at all. The decentralized internet, I think, is a really good description of it, because it is the way that people are going to communicate over the internet. It's going to sit on top of the internet that exists. So I think of it as another layer in the internet stack that is decentralized, so that there is no point of control, so that the data is distributed and it's resilient. It is censorship resistant, and should be, up to the extent that the law says otherwise. So we see Web3 as part of the decentralized internet, and Jurat is part of the stack in Web3, because if somebody is using a decentralized social media site and they post copyright infringing material or national secrets or something, there has to be a legally authorized method to take that down, just as there is in Web 2. But in Web 2, you can go serve the paperwork on Facebook and say, take it down. In Web 3, there's nobody to serve it on. So
that's a really, really good point. With you're seeing really high adoption in Lin's protocol and Farcaster and all of that. And that's a question that comes up. How are you enforcing OFAC? How are you enforcing copyright infringement?
And they can't do it if they're really decentralized. So either you're centralized and you're using some efficiencies and some cool things that Web3 has to offer, but you're not Web3, or there's got to be some other method by which the law gets enforced.
And you're going to be that method. I love it. So that actually leads perfect into our next question. I know we've gone through a thought experiment, so some of this may be a bit repetitive, but where do you see yourself and Web3 as an industry in the next 6 to 12 months? And then where do you see yourself in Web3 in the next 5 to 10 years?
So the next 6 to 12 months is I think is a struggle for Web3, but a really interesting struggle, because while it feels like the house is burning, there are people building other rooms. And so we're going to see like that old house is going to burn down and there's going to be this new house. And so that's what's going on right now. It's an uncomfortable space in which to build where you feel like everybody's barking at you. But I think it's going to produce really cool, really usable products. So the next 6 to 12 months are building under stressful circumstances that'll have a lot of good war stories that people will be able to tell in 5 years, when I do think there will be substantially more adoption built upon what's going to get built in the next 6 to 12 months. And we might not even be concerned that we're calling it Web3. I really do believe the mantra that, Web3 is going to succeed when people have no idea that that's what they're using. And I feel like Zabbo is that. It's a payments app that's able to use smart contracts in a way that, facilitates payments that you couldn't do in a Web 2 way. You'd have to go get an escrow agent, and they're going to charge a fee, and they're going to make sure that they're going to charge you a special fee if they have to review legal papers and all of that. So I think that there's so much there, and that can be released for more widespread commerce, more widespread ways that we live our lives every day. And so far, it's only been focused on a very niche, financial, some would say casino use that drew people in. And now we're going to build from it. Going back to the earlier days of the internet. So like in the 1990s, I dated a woman who was a librarian for AOL, which was like the portal at the time.
Yeah.
And it was still at a time where people tried to index every single website out there and categorize it. And that was her job. And she told me that like 90% of the sites on the internet were porn. And so porn's what drew people in. Then look what the internet became. And so I feel like crypto and the finance and the casino part of it drew people in. And now it's going to become something else.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on a really good point, which is porn being a mass adopter is just reflective that humans are humans, right? Yeah. We're always going to appeal to human nature in the end. And if that means that it starts in a crude area, but then expands to be so many of the different use cases that are now possible on the internet, that's how we figure it out. A lot of people would say that the reason digital marketing got to start was because of porn, right? So that's just part of the growth prospect. It's an easy thing for a politician or someone to be like, oh, it's only used. And it's like, well, let's stay away from these, all encompassing words. But yeah, I'm excited to see what you guys build. Really appreciate you coming on the show. And yeah, I look forward to building a legally safe future, or watching you build a legally safe future.
That's great. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for tuning in to Web3 with me. If you enjoyed the show and want to help us grow, please hit the subscribe button on YouTube or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you want to connect with me personally, you can find me on Twitter @Zach_French_.